the field matters, right? So, just because that there's a frequency that helps with XYZ, I mean, clearly there's plenty of people that are like, I tried that and it didn't work, right? It doesn't mean necessarily that, that won't work. But if the body wasn't realizing, hey, we're speaking to you, like we're trying to show you something, and it wasn't on to listening because that field wasn't coherent, then yeah, you're not going to get, the ability for that information to sync or to start re-educating the field of the body. So the way information is delivered is really important in many of the different types of what I call blocks, so which are like therapeutic type of frequencies that are kind of put together for certain types of dysfunctions. A lot of them I will put Fibonacci or phi sequences, geometric sequences, solfeggio, nogier, different types of tones that give a structure in a way for such information to travel, because that's obviously going to be just as important as what you're actually giving, right? Because if it's not heard, it doesn't matter. And that's very important. And also, too, there's a lot of growing issues with people, which I refer to it as polarization. There's many different types and ways and extents that can happen. But if somebody has a problem with that toroidal field and they're no longer able to have that gyroscopic balance where that they're in harmony with being able to have the proper relationship and charge relationship with the environment, they're not going to do well with energy medicine. They have to actually go through biomagnetic type of restructuring to get that grid or that gyroscopic nature back intact so that they have the proper relationship. An example of that would be, let's say that you take a binder, right? And that's something that most people, if they took that and they're trying to, detox from mold, or they're trying to do parasites and mop up the toxins from that, like they're going to say, wow, this helps. This makes me feel better because it's binding out the toxin. But that's based on the fact that you are intact enough in the field that your charges interact properly with those, elemental metals in the binders. If you are reversed or polarized, meaning, your compass is pointing south instead of north, but it still shows north, like you think it's going north, but it's leading you south, you're going to have the wrong relationship. You're going to think good is bad and bad is good. And hence these people are going to have reactions to therapies that everybody else swears works for them, but it doesn't work for them. And they're right. And in fact, the more they do these therapies that work for everybody else, maybe the worse they feel, because instead of actually, getting these metals to bind out, maybe they're further having that pull and that force to keep them in the body. So it's also very important to understand if you are in the proper framework or in the canvas set to be able to use energy medicine. And typically, if you're not able to use energy medicine, then you're not able to use the biochemical model, the mechanical model, or any of these things. But we're a good place to start in being able to identify if that might be your issue.
Because that will come up on the scan if that's the case.
Yeah, I have an atomic scan that I created, which actually literally looks at the electrons. I mean, you could actually see the spin, the vortex. You can see, the different types of subatomic particles. You can see different types of electromagnetic fields that might be playing a role in skewing your field. And there's a lot of overlay with that. For example, if I see somebody, that, and I've seen obviously tons of sets of data at this point, but if I see somebody that was originally maybe, let's say, just discovering that they had pancreatic cancer versus 6 months into it versus a year into it, I can literally see the way that the electron shift happens, right? So at first it's like very high upregulated, electron, and that's an activity that's in essence a compensation, because as we know, electron donation is really how we're mitigating some of these oxidative properties or mutagenesis, et cetera. That's our corrector in the body, right? But once that kind of fizzles out and there's only so much energy capacity to be able to keep up with that, we then run into a sluggish electron function. And that's whenever we can't keep up with that editing anymore. And then we start to kind of lose the battle and become clinically, cancer positive. And then you just see that go kaput. So you literally will see stages of down and up regulation with the way that the electron function works. And that's a direct correlation, not just to something like that I've mentioned, but the way that you're going to react in general when it comes to energy or fields and, everything in life around you.
So what is the original cause of that? Like what causes that shift in polarization?
Sure. So a lot of what we have right now are the non-native fields, such as, EMFs. And that's where I kind of get a little bit on a different path than many who are like in the functional or even the energy kind of world, where they're like, oh, this is just horrible, it's bad. Of course, it's non-native. It's not, ideal. It's not good. But again, it's about the way that, the universal patterns are delivered. So if this was something that, was just exposed intermittently, et cetera, it probably wouldn't be that huge of a deal. We could kind of compensate and we'd be resilient enough to kind of repair, and the body would have its center point and it would understand where it returns to back at that 0 point. The problem is this: it's unrelenting, it's 24/7, and it's all the time. And that is not the way nature speaks. It never speaks that way. Even think about the patterns we have with the sun and the moon. Even think about the phases of the moon, the energy pool, the gravitation fields. All of this is ever subtly changing to support the patterns that we need to keep the life cycle flowing, right? All of these particular types of fields create and trigger certain processes in creation in general, whether it's a worm that knows to come from the soil, whether it's a breeding season for, a specific type of life, whether it's a flower knowing when to grow, whether it's us, as women knowing when to menstruate, not us, but our bodies. All of that is a governed intelligence based on all of this information. So if we are detached from this, first of all, because we have a lot of other non-native frequencies, which is information and instruction code telling us to behave differently or giving different instruction code to our body, not only are you losing that influence that should be the guiding instruction code, like if you're a Mac, you should be run on Mac software, you're now getting PC software, which is not compatible, okay? And then we get into problems, right? You get malware, basically. At what point does that computer crash when it's like, wait, Mac, PC, right? And then we get this kind of inability to really have that right relationship with energy. We can become skewed because the body's confused at that point. But again, if it wasn't, for the unrelenting all the time type of fact that this is a wavelength that's in your face at every angle, it's not like that's the end of the world just for that. I think some people and if you are electromagnetic sensitive, it's justified and you have an extra sensitivity, you should take those precautions. But I do think some people get very fear mindset about the 5G and about some of the electromagnetic fields. I definitely have tons of harmonizing things in my house to create the right biofield and protective little bubble for myself. But I'm also not going to live in complete fear that is just arch nemesis number one, because I know that there is, so much more to it than that. It's not just, and like everything in life, and everything in the universe, it's not just an all good or all bad. It's the continuum gradient in the spectrum of all this mixed energy that creates balance. And that's really what resonance really is. You cannot have an optimization of energy, if you will, without, some pushback or some resistance, right? So the sweet spot is going to be where we come to a nice balance. It's not about highest maximum output or yield or the lowest performance. It's coming right in the middle, and you have to have both sets of energy in order to be able to do that. But I'm very into PEMF, and so PEMF for biomagnetic kind of therapy, that will really help to kind of get the get the magnetic fields or get the body speaking back on the code of what Schumann resonance would be giving, because that's how the body speaks. So, that's how we speak. Our body speaks with the universal instruction codes. Those would be kind of the first places I would recommend to go.